Let me just formally start. Right now, it is June 26th, Monday, at 4:30 p.m. This is a meeting of the Cohasset Select Board. Tonight's meeting, or this afternoon's meeting, will be conducted on a Zoom platform and live streamed on Cohasset 143 TV and Cohasset's Facebook page. The public is invited to participate on the Zoom platform, which can be accessed using the link provided on the select board agenda. Members of the board and other participants will be able to participate when called upon by the chair. Board members will be able to ask any questions of any participant. All votes taken this meeting will be called by roll call because we're all virtual. Members of the public who wish to ask questions are asked to raise their virtual hand on Zoom, and at the discretion of the chair will be promoted into the meeting. Members must provide their full name and address for the public record. Please note that comments on other platforms other than Zoom are not being monitored. This meeting is being recorded and will be available for later viewing on Cohasset 143 TV. So let me do roll call right now. I'm going to start with Mr. Plex. Mr. Plex, can you identify yourself for the roll? Chris? All right, I'm going to move to Mr. Grady.
Paul Grady present.
Okay. Mr. Creighton.
Jack Creighton here.
Ms. Marr.
Ellen Marr present.
Jean Haley-Dibble present. Okay. So the agenda item that we have today is, Chris, I see you. Would you like to identify yourself for the role, Chris? There we go.
I apologize for the technical challenges. Chris Plex present.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. So we're moving on to interviews for the Community Preservation Committee. Right now we have 3 open seats. There's 3 citizen at large appointments that the select board makes on CPC. The terms are 3 years for 1 seat, 2 years for another seat, and 1 year for a 3rd seat. And right now we have 5 applicants, and 3 of them are here today. Right now, the 4th will, I believe, be at our select board meeting on Tuesday. He was not able to join today. And the 5th one, I haven't heard back from him. I think he's traveling for work, so we might not hear back, but we'll start with the 3 that we have right now. Before I promote the 3 interviewees, is there any discussion the select board wants to have before I do so? Okay.
Perhaps we promote one at a time.
We can promote one at a time.
I mean, the others can hear, obviously, but
Yeah.
keeps our focus on each individual.
Michelle, could you help? Let's promote Mr. Souza first. He's first on the attendee list from what I see. I don't think I can do that.
Hi, everybody. It's Darren Souza here, 70 Black Rock Road.
Hi, Mr. Souza. Thank you for your interest in the CPC. I would like to invite any of my fellow, well, first let me start off and ask if you wouldn't mind just telling us generally your interest in CPC, and then I'll open it to my fellow members to ask questions.
Thank you. Yep, so thank you for having me here to discuss one of the openings for CPC. My interest lies in, the CPA program throughout the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. It's been quite transformational, and some towns, very important to the character of all towns. So in Cohasset, we also have our, a very, I think, fortuitous history with CPC programs, whether they're open spaces, recreation, historical preservation, housing. So I'd love to be a part collaboratively to keep it moving forward. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Souza. Does anyone have a question they'd like to ask of Mr. Souza? Mr. Creighton?
I have a, just a general question. And, thank you, Darren. You've done a lot of good work around town. It's been noticed. And that's important. When you mention all the various things that CPC is designated to put their funding towards, the question is, do you see yourself as an advocate for a certain sector of things that you've been previously involved with, or do you see yourself as a generalist who's looking to balance all the different competing interests?
Thank you for the question, Jack. I think I would consider myself more of a generalist. I think the character of this community is, I think, best reflected in that more balanced way in terms of what we seek to preserve and how we, can grow and improve responsibly. I think that with respect to areas that I've historically advocated for, which does fall around recreation and sports and amenities like that, I think I could contribute to, a thoughtful conversation about when such issues and projects arise, how we can think about them in a new way, a different way. So I can bring context probably from one angle,
Yes.
but my interest is probably a little more holistic as an advocate.
Right. So you wouldn't see yourself as an advocate for that particular group. And by the way, I'm asking the same question of everybody.
I think I wouldn't say that I'm not an advocate. I'd say that I would advocate for a thoughtful and proactive, conveyance of initiatives and needs that maybe come from the rec side per se. So I could probably better advocate there than elsewhere based on my experience, but I don't come with an agenda per se. So.
Okay, Mr. Grady?
Hi, Darren. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
I apologize. I'm driving. Darren, thanks so much. I've worked very well with you. And I just have one thing to ask. How do you feel about working collegially with this board? I mean, we've got an agenda. We've got a lot of work to do. And, we're hoping to tie in every one of the boards and committees that can work with us. Obviously, people have their own thoughts and plans, but what we'd like to set up is kind of a united team. So how do you feel about working collegially with these boards and various boards?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I think this town has a lot of important matters and questions to solve that are going to be decades into the future in terms of their implications. So I don't think we have a choice other than to come together and to collaboratively, lay all those issues on the table and just and work through them as a team. So absolutely. And, I think that's the character of Cohasset. Everybody has maybe differences of opinion, certain disagreements, but I think we have what we have because there is a community spirit here. So I just want to follow that, really.
Well, thank you very much.
Okay, Ms. Marr, do you have any questions?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Darren. It's nice to see you.
Hi.
So I have two kind of general questions related to your past experience. One is what is your philosophy on spending, as a previous board member and, keeper of policy for different boards? And then what kind of factors do you look at when you go to make a decision?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think in terms of spending and allocating resources, I kind of look at the first, the first principles around that. And I think we have to, we have to realistically have a way to synthesize. And CPC is an interesting example because there's mandated, whether it's 10% here to preservation or whatever, they're mandated buckets. So, there could be theoretically a hierarchy of needs and criticality, but we, by design, there's some diversification. So, here you have to find a way to align what the CPA mandates and what the mandate is as it pertains to our town and initiatives and projects that come to CPC, there's got to be some sort of alignment. And so I think spending, I think, is obviously tied to resources, but in this case, it's also got to be tied to, you have to stick to the letter of the law, but also the spirit of the CPA mandate. So there's the policy aspect. So I don't know. I just think I would just try to best interpret both of those. So that's number one. I think so. In I think the second part of your question was, how have I executed on that based on my past experience? Or I'm sorry, I want to just capture the second part of that.
Yeah, no, what factors do you take in your decision making?
Well, I think in this particular case, I think first we have to satisfy baseline requirements, and some of those are laid out in very specific criteria or around the act and around, there's a matrix, for example, of, you can't, if someone's coming for upkeep for facilities, it's not eligible. So there's the eligibility thing first and foremost.
Mhm.
I think we want applicants to submit quality, well thought out requests that make standalone sense. So I think there's probably a quality aspect to, what gets put in front of the board. And, I think your first, second, even third year and beyond on any kind of committee, I think you want to have a learner's mindset. I think it's important just to hear as many voices and to sort of get, you can never get enough appreciation for how, how other people are impacting the community. So I just think getting a pulse on the community and the history around certain projects is very, very important.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Plex, do you have any questions?
Just briefly, and Darren, I think you touched on it in answering Ellen's questions, but one of the things that I think is most important about the CPC is that you're making recommendations about public funding. So can you speak to the importance of transparency and engagement with the community in making those recommendations?
Yeah, I mean, so with my first year being, if I were to serve an initial year on this board, I would like to follow the best practices, around that. So there's obviously meeting protocol. There's conversations that I'm sure that are matters of public record. So I don't know exactly what those best practices are, but I would assume I'd follow those literally. Speaking, I don't, I would imagine there's the opportunity to have one-off conversations where only certain people are in the room. And so I would follow the spirit and any policies around transparency. So.
But you would agree that transparency and engagement with the community are important in this role, right?
100%, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Souza, I'm going to ask you two questions that I'm going to ask every candidate. And the first question is, the select board is seemingly about to adopt a goal to try to do a variety of infrastructure projects in the fall. And one of those projects is likely to be eligible, if not the vast majority, the entirety of it, for CPC funding. This is the Fields and Recreation project that the select board has been working on for many years now and was trending towards a potential vote at spring meeting, but it wasn't quite ready yet. So my question for you is, and you spoke about transformational projects earlier, would you be willing to help support the select board's recommendation, if we were so inclined, for a significant contribution to the Fields and Recreation project that, if CPC doesn't fund it, might otherwise be a tax increase for Cohasset residents?
Thanks, Jean. I mean, the answer is within a holistic, conversation where, we're looking at things from a 360-degree standpoint. The answer is yes. I think to the extent that, I guess the litmus that I would maybe apply would be, the litmus that I would apply would be that, are we using the CPC, you know, well, there's what we generate and there's what distributions we receive. Are we being good fiduciaries with those resources already so that we're not unduly taxing citizens on critically needed infrastructure improvements? So I'd say I'm inclined to say intuitively that that's how we may want to be thinking about it, but I'd want to be, you know, two sets of ears to hear all perspectives around the table.
Okay, thank you. And my second question relates to the approach to town projects, as well as others, where historically the CPC has taken sort of an unofficial approach of 50-50. 50 from other sources, whether it's free cash or a capital stabilization fund, and 50 from CPC, sort of a matching approach, which is a potentially good idea, but also may be a barrier to getting some projects done. Would you be willing to do a contribution that is potentially 100% in the future for a CPC eligible project? Or would you continue to follow the historic practice of 50-50?
I would never want to follow something just for the sake of it being a historical norm. You know, the CPC program has flourished, and if we look at, you know, if you even go into the data and the database, and you look at, not that the coffers have swollen over the past couple of years, but they have grown more and more healthy and capable of doing more. So I think you want to sort of continually reassess what a good fiduciary would do with maybe more resources and in the face of a greater need. So I would, my blunt answer is perhaps it could be somewhere in between 50 you know, to 100, but I think, you know, the financial positioning has evolved. So I think just leaning on what we've done in the past is not something I'd be inclined to do by default.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Souza. We are going to thank you for your application and your interest. I expect we will vote tomorrow at the select board meeting. And someone will let you know the outcome if you're unable to join. I'm going to promote now Mr. Reardon.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Darren.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take
Thanks.
care. Thank you all.
Hello, Mr. Reardon.
Hello,
Hello, how are you?
I'm great, thanks. How are you?
I'm great. So Mr. Reardon, if you could just give us like a minute overview of your interest in CPC. It's probably obvious, but we're asking everyone the same.
Sure, absolutely. I've been on CPC now for, I guess, 6 years, this 2 terms. And I found it to be a tremendous opportunity and a great vehicle. I think it addresses needs that the town might not otherwise be able to really address significantly. And so I've been thrilled to be part of it and would love to continue.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I'm going to go in the same order as last time. Mr. Creighton, would you like to ask any questions?
Yeah. Hi, Tom. Thanks for your previous 2 terms, and thanks for putting your hat in the ring again. I'll ask you the same question I've asked. There are some things I think in town that you've been a strong advocate of. And in those types of things, do you see your role as CPC as being an advocacy for those positions? Or do you see your role as looking at the totality of the town's needs and balancing them amongst all of the needs, irrespective of whether it may be one of your particular favorites?
Absolutely the latter. As in the term that I've been on, I felt as a citizen in large that it was my responsibility to try to balance these things and to be wide open to mindful of the 3 categories that we are charged with supporting, to try to get balances right there and figure out what the needs of the town are. And so I do not feel that I'm in there to advocate for this or that, but rather to try to present a balanced picture of the town's needs and opportunities.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Grady?
Hi, Mr. Reardon, and thank you so much, and thank you for your past service. Couple questions that I have. The first one's the same one I asked Mr. Souza. You know, this is a relatively new board. We have a new board now, and are you prepared to work collegially with this board? We want to bring the boards and groups together. And I'll be quite frank, that I found at some points in time, CPC it was kind of an adversarial relationship, and maybe that's my personal approach and my personal views. And I would like to think we don't want that to be the case. We've got a lot of projects, as the chair just mentioned, that we want to work with CPC and work with the other boards and committees. I'm just wondering if you're prepared to do that.
Absolutely. But I think it's a little bit tricky in this regard. We share a common interest and obligation to serve the town and the town's needs. There are times at which the mandate of CPC and the desires of town may be in some tension. And there, I think we have to try to reason together to try to figure out what that might be. But in the prior town hall committee, I was on that committee at the same time being on CPC, and a strong advocate of CPC being deeply involved in the funding of the town hall. So it depends what the particular case is, but that in general, I would say it's not only the desire, but I think the obligation of our committee to work with the town and work with the select board.
That's where I bump back to the collegiality. So it's nice to hear that you're prepared to do that and work with us as much as we want to work with you. You know, I think that's extremely important, and I just haven't seen that to be the case. And I'm not citing any members or anything like that. I think CPC is fantastic. I was on it for a short time.
I remember that.
When I was on the planning board. So, you know, I do look forward to if everything goes well. And again, I thank you for stepping up to the plate. It's just, I think that's important going forward with this board, that we're working hand in glove, the various boards and committees. I mean, you know, disagreements, but we iron them out. And, you know, and we come to a common goal, which is making Cohasset a better place.
Okay, Mr. Plex, I think you were next. I can't remember though.
If you're going in order, I believe Mrs. Marr was first.
I'm sorry, Miss Marr, you're
Okay.
changed order on the screen for me.
Thank you. Hi, Mr. Reardon. It's very nice to meet you, and thank you for your service.
Thank you.
I kind of have a twofold question, and based on your experience on CPC, how would you define your philosophy on spending, and what factors do you take in your decision making?
On the first piece of it, I think that the legislation mandates certain levels of funding, and there are different needs at different times. And so I think those selections really reflect more what's going on at any given moment than really a philosophical view. It's trying to balance the terms that were defined by the legislation, look at the town's needs. For example, we've made a big commitment to affordable housing in the last year. And I think that's because prior initiatives were stymied, I think, in some respects by timing of funding, that sort of thing. So with the creation of the trust, we were able to do some funding that I think and hope is going to make a difference. So that was at that particular moment, a great opportunity to do something in an area where we've not had a whole lot of success. And I can see that there'll be things coming up. Jean had mentioned the fields that are coming up. I think at that time, you're kind of dictated to think about what is the funding priority the town needs now. But that has to be balanced against the mandate of the legislation. And then the second part of how do you make decisions? I think you tried the best you can to figure out what is in the town's interest? What is the pressing need? This sort of reflects what I just said in some regards. It's going to be different things at different times, but you want to make sure you listen, that you're informed on what's going on in the town. And we're not just filling buckets in order to fill buckets, that we're trying, or to politically appease people, but we're trying to meet the town's needs.
Excellent, thank you.
Mr. Plex?
First off, Tom, good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Same question I asked Mr. Souza. If you could speak to the importance of transparency and engagement with the community, considering that community preservation is making recommendations about public funds.
I think it's critically important. And I think it's an area where we could do better. I don't think there is enough visibility about what CP is, the CPC is, how it works, what its funding mechanisms are. I think for those advocate groups, they know about it, but the town at large, I think, does not. And I think that's certainly unintentional, but is nonetheless, I think, a reality. And I think we ought to think about how we get that out. I think that would help us also generate more and interesting proposals. There are times that we have to tug at people to try to get proposals. So I think in the area, there's no philosophical or political opposition to transparency, but I don't think we've provided the level of transparency that could be helpful.
Thank you very much.
So Mr. Reardon, thank you. And I'm gonna take the last set of questions. I see you, Paul, but I'm also mindful of the time with Ms. Dial.
It's all right. Don't worry about it.
It's nice to see you again from when we were on CPC.
Indeed.
So I'm going to ask you the same question that I asked Mr. Souza, but I'm going to try to reduce it to one question, which is historically CPC has done 50-50 contributions, as we know and saw when we were on CPC. And we're coming up to some substantial projects that could carry some substantial tax increases. And as we look for ways, and I'm putting on my long-term financial planning hat right now, trying to figure out ways to mitigate tax burdens for residents, would you be willing to support a select board goal and project, including up to 100% for something like Field and Rec, if it was CPC eligible, that might otherwise have to be a tax increase for the citizens in order to get that project done?
I'd certainly be open to look at that, by all means. The difficulty I have, or my concern, is it depends what the 100% funding level means for our resources. I'm reluctant to mortgage the future for the current. And so I think I'm not against bonding at all, but if we have a bonding structure that's debt service that eats up our ability to make grants going forward over the next 5 to 10 years, I think that's a mistake. So we need somehow to be able to balance the future and the present. And so I don't have a philosophical objection at all, but I have a practical financial concern.
Well, and Mr. Reardon, because you're a CPC expert, I'm going to ask.
I'm sure that's accurate.
I'm going to ask one more question. So we actually don't trigger the full surcharge for CPC that we could. If we did trigger the full surcharge, we could tax Cohasset residents, but get 10% back through a state contribution. And so one could argue that maybe what we should do financially is look to try to leverage that money instead of using our tax levy. And so if we did some transformational projects that people liked, to your point, that had a CPC stamp on them, they might be willing to pay more of a CPC tax if they start to see like really large public visible examples. And that might be something that the long-term financial planning group thinks about, but I think a part of that is going to have to be the public transparency and seeing the fruits of CPC really come to life. So I wanted to throw that out there because I know you know CPC very well. And so I wanted to get your reaction to that.
Well, it's interesting. Part of it would depend on the sequence of things, that if it would be approved the project and then hope the town will vote the money and we bonded the project, I think that puts us in a bind. If it's see whether the town will accept the larger contribution and then vote the project, or somehow balance those two things so that we don't end up in a surprise position that we have a greater commitment, but the town doesn't want to pay for it. So it's how we.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting we approve a project contingent on a tax increase that hasn't been approved. More about if we want to increase the CPC coffers for more projects, including
Yes.
ones, but also a variety of different ones.
On the surface, I'm all in favor of that, as a matter of fact, if we think we can do it, but it's, yeah, so
Okay. Well, thank you again. Thank you for your time. I
it's a
appreciate
pleasure.
it. And like I told Mr. Souza, we are likely going to be voting tomorrow. I think around, I forget exactly when on the agenda, somewhere between 7:30 to 8 on CPC appointments. So
Okay,
if you can't make it, we'll let you know either way. So thank you again.
great. Thank you so much. Thank you all so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
You.
Thanks, Tom.
Bye-bye.
And Miss.
Just waiting for
Dottie.
Jennifer to come in.
Okay. Hello, Miss Dial. How are you?
For you.
Great. So if you wouldn't mind just taking a minute to talk about your interest in CPC before we start doing the questions.
Sure, absolutely. So as I think you're aware, and some of the other members of the select board, I have been a member of the Cohasset Parent School Organization for the last now 6 years, although this is my retirement effective July 1st. And so what I've seen over the years, just doing stuff with the school and kind of getting more involved with the community, there's a lot of aspects in the town that I think, you know, we want to grow and we want to make improvements and changes on. And so I just think it's a really great opportunity to have a big impact on what is happening in the town and some changes that we can make to sort of move everything forward.
Okay, great. Thank you. And thank you for your interest. Mr. Creighton, would you like to go first?
Sure. Yeah, hi, Jennifer. Thanks for all your past work. Same question I've asked everybody else. You bring a certain expertise and a lot of commitment that you've made to elements of the town that you've found of particular interest. Would you see your position on the CPC as using that knowledge to kind of advocate those types of issues? Or would you see your role as really assessing the general needs of the town and balancing them?
So I think in this role, you really need to expand your view and look at everything. In addition, obviously, I've been very involved with the schools, but in addition, my property abuts land that belongs to the trustees of reservations. And so I've become a lot more concerned about sort of the open space, protecting the land. And of course, obviously, affordable housing is important, fields and recreation, and then, you know, obviously historic buildings, et cetera. And so I think that while I would be able to sort of help bring a different viewpoint to the committee and maybe answer questions that people have about things that I'm more knowledgeable of in my background, I think that you really need to be open-minded about where the funding is going and looking at what is going to have some of the greatest impact on the town and what the town really needs versus what, you know, I may personally have been interested in before.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mr. Grady?
Hi, Ms. Dial. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Very well, thanks. I should have two questions. First, I'm going to use my first question. How do you feel about working collegially with the select board and the other boards and committees so we can move town forward? We hope in a positive direction.
I would look forward to working with this board and any of the other boards. I have found that in my role previously, one of the best things you can do is to really collaborate. And just as an example, the PSO and the CEF have always sort of been rivals in the past. And what I had started doing is working with them to sort of become a more cohesive group. And so I think in that respect, I've learned that things don't get done if you don't work together. And so it's really important that everybody works together and that there's a lot of open communication.
Okay, and last question. How am I going to phrase this? Where do you see CPC as needing improvement, and what do you think you can do to improve it?
So I would see one of the biggest things is something, and this question has come up before, is transparency. I'll be completely honest, up until this last year or so, when I saw things coming in with town hall funding, I didn't really know much about the CPC or where the money was going or how it worked. And when I saw it listed on a couple of town hall on the warrants, is when I sort of started looking into it, seeing who was on the board and learning about it. And so I think what I would want to do is really open that transparency, let people know what this committee does, and also really sort of look to make sure that the projects that it's working on are things that the town really wants and need, and that aren't necessarily projects or things that people on the committee maybe want or are pushing for.
Thank you, and thank you very much for applying for CPC.
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Moore.
Hi, Jen, how are you?
Good.
Good. So I have two questions, but I'm gonna tweak it a little bit. First, I'm gonna say on your application, you also indicated you might be interested in school facilities committee. Is that correct? And if so, if you were selected to both, would you serve on both? Or would you pick and choose? Would you pick one or the other?
If I was selected to be on both, for those who know me, I don't like to be bored. So I would, if there wasn't a conflict that the select board saw, I would absolutely work on both.
Okay. And then my next question is, in your past, in your different roles with PSO, and I know, a lot of it is driven by the grants, and CPC runs the same way. How do you look and evaluate a grant and decide which ones you're going to select and which ones you're not?
So we do grant cycles twice a year in the PSO. And so first and foremost, what we look at is we make sure that what has been requested hits the criteria first. So we make sure, does it fall under our guidelines? And does it meet all the check boxes that we need? Now, unfortunately, not everything is fully black and white, but the first big thing is to make sure, does it qualify? And then once we would determine that, and I would use the same, logic and reasoning with this committee, is after it hits that, then we sort of look at, okay, where does this fall in terms of how many people does it impact? Where does it fall as an overall town priority? Is this something that just, is going to only help a small group and just a small number of people really want? Or are we looking at what is going to have the most impact, not just now, but in the future? And also too, something that is also reasonably doable, and something that is financially feasible, and that we can sort of, get moving on as quickly as we can.
Great, thank you.
All right, Mr. Plex.
Good to speak with you again, Jen.
Hi,
So-
nice to see you.
Same question I've asked the other candidates. CPC is making recommendations about how to use public funding. Could you speak to the importance of transparency and community engagement in that role?
Absolutely. So I do think that whenever you are charged with taking money that people have paid through taxes, or in the past when we had donations, I think that you need to make sure that you are using the money in the way that the people who have given you that money and who have given you the charge are using it responsibly in the way that they want. And so I think that you need to be very transparent in terms of what you're doing, how you're doing it, and also not just what you're doing, but why you're doing it. A previous life, I was a member of the media, and I was a television news producer. And so transparency is very important to me. And just the step-by-step process, and just making sure that people really know the thinking behind it, And also, you know, being open to understanding why other towns and committees are thinking the way they are. And so being not just communicative out, but also in. So you need to not just tell people what you're doing, but listen to why other people think maybe you should be doing something else or how you should be doing it. I think you have to have an open mind, but while also following those guidelines and that charge that you are given under the laws.
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Dial, I'll try to make this quick. One last question. So same question I've asked everyone else. Historically, the CPC has employed a 50-50 approach, which is not required by law. It's been a preference of some to do 50% from CPC, 50% from other sources, which may make sense for some projects, but for others, it may mean that they can't go forward. As we look at different projects that the town is trying, the select board and the town are trying to push forward, that may require tax increases if we do not get a substantial amount of CPC funding, including potentially up to 100%. Would you be willing to fund up to 100% with CPC funding for a substantial project if the math made sense?
So I don't think that you can just continue to do, if you know, if they've always just done 50-50. I think that every project and every application needs to be looked at individually. And so I think that following sort of a 50-50 rule doesn't necessarily always make sense. So right off the bat, I think you have to look at each one with new eyes to see what the funding is, where it comes from, and if it's something that is financially makes sense, if it's 100%, if it's 75%, or however it is. I think that you need to be open and willing to do that. And I think as long as, and I think Mr. Reardon had said this, you know, making sure that other projects that maybe are important aren't going to be thrown to the side or not be able to be funded in the future. As long as everything is balanced and making sense, I don't think there's any reason why you couldn't do 100%, as long as it made sense financially and that it was a project that was, you know, a highly supported project within the town by the board, and that would really make a big impact in the town.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you very much for your
Thank
time
you.
and your interest. And as I told the others, we're going to vote tomorrow once everyone has a chance to be interviewed, and we'll let you know if you can't join tomorrow.
Great.
So thank you again.
Thank you. And thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time to speak with me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks so
Thank you.
much.
All right. So we are at the point right now, I believe, of adjourning our meeting. I'd invite a motion. We don't have anything else on the agenda.
Motion to adjourn.
I'd make a motion. Second.
All right, let me do roll call vote because we're virtual. Mr. Creighton,
Jack Creighton, aye.
Mr. Grady,
Grady, puffed. Paul Grady, aye.
Ms. Mar,
Ellen Mar, aye.
Mr. Plex.
Chris Plex, aye.
All right, and Jean Haley Dippold, aye. All right, I'll see everyone tomorrow.
Very
See you
good.
tomorrow.
There,
Aye.
everybody.
Bye.